So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Larry Olmsted, author of Fans: How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Understanding. Larry will be in conversation tonight with Gregory Stroud. Hello.
Hello.
Hello to both of you. So for those of you that don't know, Larry Olmsted is an award-winning journalist and author. He wrote the New York Times bestseller, Real Food, Fake Food, and Getting into Guinness, A History of the Guinness Book of World Records, a book for which he broke 3 world records himself while researching. Larry has taught at Dartmouth College as a visiting professor, where he taught nonfiction writing, and he currently writes online columns for Forbes and USA Today, and regularly appears on television and radio. Olmsted is an avid fan of American Ninja Warrior and a passionate fan of sports. And Gregory Stroud is co-founder and editor of the Connecticut Examiner, one of the state's fastest growing sources of news. He is a lapsed baseball fan and ardent fan of the New York Giants. He earned a PhD in Russian history and taught at Bennington College before dropping out of academics to work in the theater on Nantucket. His translation and adaptation of Chekhov's Cherry Orchard premiered at the Theater Workshop in 2012, and he lives in Old Lyme. So welcome to both of you. We're excited about this event. I'm from Alabama, so football, in particular, SEC football, is like a religion down there. So I think this will be a fun conversation tonight. So Larry and Gregory are going to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we will open it up to those questions that have been submitted either through the chat or through the Q&A button. So go ahead and take it away.
So Larry, I have to say that I was a fan, or I knew your writing before. I didn't know your name, but I knew obviously your book about real food, and I think it's sort of in people's consciousness. But right now, it seems that you're a travel writer. You write about food, and now sports, and we're in a pandemic. These are 3 things we sort of can't do, or maybe we can only partially do, or maybe we'll be doing them really soon. And I guess I was wondering, to start out, like, where was this book born? Like, why did you decide to write about sports fans? Were you in an airport bar in Sweden, and you said, this is what I need to write?
Well, there was a lot of airport bars involved in the process, but no, my books are about very different topics, but what they have in common is I like a story that hides in plain sight. So I'm always attracted to a different take on something everybody thinks they know about. Everybody's heard of the Guinness Book of World Records. Everyone's heard of food. Everybody knows what sports are, but I approach them all in ways that people didn't know anything about or knew very little about. It's kind of that aha moment. And for me, I went to a Red Sox game at Fenway Park many years ago, like 8 or 9 years ago, and they were playing the Yankees, and I saw this couple that had 2 young kids, like 5 and 7-ish, dressed in T-shirts with obscenities aimed at the New York Yankees. And the first thing I thought, which is a weird thought, this is how my mind works, is, wait, I bet you can't buy those at the Red Sox gift shop. You know, that's like the first thing that occurred to me. And you can't, which then led me down this path of thinking, wow, they really went out of their way. They either bought them on the street or the gray market or had them made, but anyway, it's wrong. And I left the game feeling like, is there something about what's wrong with these people? Is there something about sports fandom that makes us do crazy things? And I was not quite up to my next book at that time, but I'm always interested in ideas. So I did some research preliminarily to flesh that out. And very quickly realized that that was completely wrong, 180 degrees, that sports fandom is overwhelmingly beneficial for us, and a lot of data supports that. But what I've come to realize is, you know, in any large group, there's about 200 million people in America who identify themselves as sports fans. You're going to have some bad apples, some outliers, but there were 44,998 people at the game that day who I didn't notice because they're normal, well-adjusted, happy sports fans, and that turns out to be the case.
This is, I mean, in many ways, it's a book about I mean, there's redemption, there's healing, there's higher GPAs, happier jobs. I'm not pretty much everything. Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of weave this book slowly, page by page, into each sort of part of our life, and you show how sort of sports fits in, and you call it a common currency. What do you mean by a common currency?
Well, it's something that we all, I mean, not everyone is a sports fan, but the majority of the people in the world, several billion people are. And it is a sort of universal language or groundbreaker that you don't have to know about the particular sport. You know, I can get into a cab in India and start talking about soccer or cricket, both of which I know nothing about, with the cab driver. And immediately every barrier of race, age, religion, culture, education, economic background disappears sort of in the face of sports. It's something that sports fans are sports fans all over the world, regardless of what sports they follow. And that's where the airport bar comes in. You know, I have traveled extensively, every inhabited continent, developed, less developed nations for 25 years, spent a lot of time in airports. And if you go into any airport bar anywhere in the world, there's going to be a TV over that bar. And chances are something is going to be on that's sportive, whether it's darts or snooker or NASCAR racing. And you can look up at that and look at your neighbor and you have a new friend.
And even if you're a Cubs fan, and for 108 years if you live that long, if you're lucky enough, you can live through a full 108 years of never winning the World Series. But part of being a sports fan is unlike, say, a film or something. You lose in this. You lose as much as you win, maybe more. If you know, for me as a Giants fan, I've been losing since 2011 pretty steadily.
Well, at least you're not a Jets fan. That's what I could say. But no, it's very interesting, because if you look at it really as a win-loss thing, then the vast majority of sports fans would be miserable if that affected them that much, because in each sport only one team wins. There's only one Super Bowl champion. If you looked at it, like, everyone else lost. But that's not really the case. What psychologists have found, a couple of things. One is that the wins have or the good moments have unlimited mental upside, whereas the losses don't have unlimited downside. And one psychologist described this to me as a sports fan circuit breaker in our head. And I like to use the example of the recent Super Bowl. If you're a Tampa Bay fan, and you're an underdog who is the first team to ever play at home in the Super Bowl, and you win, that's 100 on a scale of 1 to 100, right? It doesn't get any better than that. Especially Tampa Bay doesn't exactly rack up trophies, right? So 100. But if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan, it's not a 0, right? You had a great season. You won the AFC going away. You went to the Super Bowl. Your fans got to go through all of those games leading up to it. So maybe it's a 20 or a 25. But the win has more value than the loss for whoever it is. And when you mentioned the Cubs in particular, once in a lifetime is once in a lifetime, and they'll remember that for their entire lifetime. I'm a Mets fan, so I can remember 1986, the last time the Mets won. Yeah, not that popular in New England, I know, but you know, the Red Sox have more than made up for it. But I don't really remember 1983 or 1989 or 1992 or the many, many mediocre seasons since then. So we remember the wins forever, but when it comes to losses, that old, you know, adage, time heals all wounds, is true. And one of the favorite things sports psychologists have studied extensively is how sports fans can distance themselves from failure but embrace success without really knowing it. And the way they do that is, in every study, when a team wins, sports fans say we won, but when the team loses, they say they lost. Meaning, you know, I had something to do with our victory, but I had nothing. It was their fault when they lost, and that's immediately, you know, puts the value on the wins, no matter how few there are.
So, but you speak in the book about this sort of tribal aspect. I think we all understand that. We sort of hinted at that right here. As a Giants fan, you know, I am supposed to hate Philadelphia, and I do, even though I love the city. You just kind of, you have to. Dallas, you can't really love Dallas. At Tampa Bay, though, they kind of have Tom Brady. I mean, does that put, I mean, you know, what does the tribe do? How does the tribe gather? How do they, how do tribal sort of politics and identity play into sports fandom?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of levels. I mean, one is the true nature. Human beings are tribal by nature, which is one of the reasons why we love being sports fans, because it gives us a community to belong to. But in terms of the rivalry aspect of it, I mean, it's part of what makes the sports fan more passionate. You know, you get maybe more excited for the Giants-Eagles game than you would for, you know, some random Giants-Cardinals game or something. But
I still feel the losses too. I hold on to those losses.
But, you know, it does bother me. You know, I'm a New Yorker who lives in New England. And so I see a lot of, you know, Yankees sucks bumper stickers, and people say, oh, I hate the Yankees. I hate Yankees fans. And I think, well, hey, you know, that's 4 hours away and you really don't know these people. That's kind of ridiculous. But I also realize at a certain level, they don't really hate the Yankees fans. They hate the idea of it. It's part of the whole thing. They don't actually say, I hate that person. But to the degree that they do, and that was probably the one resounding thing that bothered me through this process, was how easily we throw words like hate around. Is the impact of fantasy sports, which is really reducing that kind of tribalism in sports. Because I mean, I interviewed what I would call a super fan, who was a very early adapter of fantasy football. Several teams, passionate about it. Redskins fan, told me it took me 4 or 5 years before I could draft anyone from the Cowboys. And I think that's a universal feeling.
Yeah, I just draft Giants. I mean, how could I draft somebody that wasn't on my team, and then I'd lose?
Right. So
same result.
People playing fantasy football want to win, and to win, you have to have a team with players from other teams. And that has had, I mean, psychologists have already been studying this, and it's having a profound effect on some of these deep-seated, you know, quote unquote hatreds. So I think I don't actually think it's that bad a thing when people say I hate XYZ fans. And, you know, our host from Alabama knows this very well. There's nothing more than college football where that happens. But, you know, the people who like UNC basketball don't actually hate everybody who went to Duke, but it's handy when you have a game.
Yeah, it provides something. But you actually speak in many ways, I think, in the book about how the sort of redemptive and healing qualities that actually are sort of the flip side of that tribal coin, maybe, or how when those boundaries are broken down, or or when we share that common currency. And one, I know you spoke about 9/11, which is a huge, you know, for Old Lyme itself, the number of losses here. And so could you speak about that? Like you write about it in the book I think in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely my favorite part of the book. You know, it's hard to say that because the chapters are like children, right? But I you know, in the course of writing, editing, going back and forth with my editor at Algonquin, I read this book in its entirety, I don't know, 60 or 70 times. And I still get teary when I read that chapter about, you know, post-traumatic healing. So hopefully it works. But it was a big surprise to me because I grew up in Queens. I went to Mets games. I used to work in the World Trade Center. So I knew a lot about 9/11 and the impact of the sports afterwards. It was the last time before the pandemic that we had a cancellation of games nationwide. 9 or 10 days later, the Mets are playing the Braves, the first professional sporting event held in New York City after 9/11. Cinderella story kind of thing. Mike Piazza, 8th inning, come from behind home run. Mets win. I had fans who told me, that was the moment it was okay to smile again. I mean, really, coming together. But because I knew that story so well, and 9/11 is so high profile, I sort of assumed it was an anomaly. But when I started researching this book, I realized it's not. It's occurred over and over, going back to ancient Greece. And sports has this power, and it happened after the Boston Marathon bombing, for sure, with the Red Sox and the whole Boston Strong thing. It happened after Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Harvey and typhoons in Asia. It's not just in the US, wildfires in Australia. But for me, it was the Las Vegas, the 1 October shooting in Las Vegas, because it's so recent, 2017. And Las Vegas was sort of a perfect storm for this, because they were the largest city in the United States that did not have a professional team in any of the 4 major sports, right? A couple of million people, no pro teams. They finally, after a long time of trying to get a pro team, land an NHL expansion team, the Golden Knights. And then 9 days before the first game is to be played, have the worst mass shooting in US history. And the way that the Knights impacted the city in those 9 days and then throughout the whole season is pretty incredible. And because it's so recent, I was actually able to go out there to Las Vegas and interview people. And I interviewed the mayor. I interviewed NHL executives. I interviewed cab drivers and bartenders. But most of all, I interviewed people who were shot or shot at in that event. And all of them told me these really heart-wrenching stories of how they found their redemption or healing through the Knights, could not have survived without the Knights. When somebody is afraid to leave their home and is enabled by sports fandom to do that, that's a moment when I said, I can no longer dismiss this as frivolous or entertainment. It's a vital part of the fabric of our society.
Which is, I think, compared to, say, being a fan of Star Wars or being a fan of Harry Potter, it's the sports that they help us make sense of our lives in a different way, maybe, or this currency that's spent buying and selling this currency, sharing this currency, actually losing. Maybe there's something really healthy about the losses or the fear of losing, and then how something like, for an expansion teams aren't supposed to win.
Right.
So it creates this language that we often talk about miracles or something, or miracles on ice, or in this case, an expansion team that wins.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, the Knights 500-1 long shots make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. They didn't win it, sort of like Rocky. People come away thinking they won it because it's such a Cinderella story, but still pretty impressive. But I think you touched on something, several things, especially I like the miracle on ice, because you can get a lot of the same sort of mental health benefits that I talk about in the book from sports fandom through other forms of fandom, like Harry Potter or Star Wars. And I'm very careful because their fans get really upset if I, say anything. But there are some key differences. And one of them is, the unscripted nature of sports. I'm a Star Wars fan myself. I saw that first movie in the theater in 1977, but I knew even then as a kid that I wouldn't have to wait 40 years and 8 sequels to know that the good guys were going to win. And, when I watch CSI, I know they're going to catch the guy. They'll get the confession at the end, whatever it is. And most of the entertainment we watch is like that. It's a foregone conclusion. And, you're a theater major, or a theater expert, right? You know what's going to happen at the end of Romeo and Juliet, but you don't ever know what's going to happen in a sporting event. And the Miracle on Ice, a perfect example. If we actually believed in our heart of hearts that the U.S. had no chance against Team Russia in Lake Placid, nobody would have watched the game. That's why we love upsets and why we love Hoosiers and Rudy and these stories, because they're real life and they happen. But on top of that, the big difference is that sports has an audience, like a physical audience at a game when there's not a pandemic. And people think, I'm watching a Giants game. But they're not really watching a football game. What they're watching is a stadium full of both spectators and players. And the spectators, which far outnumber the players and all have the same uniforms and foam fingers and signs, are in full view the entire time. So unlike when I watch Star Wars on the couch alone, I know I'm alone and I'm watching a movie and I'm enjoying it, but I'm not part of anything. When sports fans watch that Giants game from their couch, they feel that they're part of what's going on at the stadium because they see their community the whole time. They feel they're part of it. And then they see it in the supermarket the next day when you walk down you wouldn't see Giants. Well, I guess in Old Line you probably would, right?
Actually, my favorite checker. That's what we share every week at Big Y. Giants.
So one NHL executive I talked to calls this the head nod, right? You see somebody in their Giants hat, you've got your Giants t-shirt on, and you're kind of like eye contact, a little nod. Again, no, it doesn't matter age, race, religion, income. You have a connection with a total stranger because of that. And the same exact thing could happen if I had on my Metallica t-shirt and you had on your Metallica t-shirt at the supermarket, but that happens a lot less statistically than it does with sports gear, especially in a hometown. And then, and this is a weird thing that I've been giving a lot of thought to, is bumper stickers, right? You see a ton of sports bumper stickers. My next door neighbor has both Red Sox and Patriots bumper stickers. And I've seen in my lifetime thousands of sports team bumper stickers, but I've never seen a Harry Potter bumper sticker. And it's this kind of thing, the uniforms, the bumper stickers, it's a constant sports talk radio, sports bars, none of which exist for other forms of entertainment for the most part. It's a constant reinforcement of this community we belong to that you can't get away from even when you're not watching the game, which, you know, is why we think we're part of, it's why we use the word nation, right? The Red Sox nation, Packers nation, but no such thing as Star Wars nation.
This is, for me, I mean, as a historian, my background is, it's the birth of professional sports in the early 20th century and late 19th century. It's one of nationalism. But and in many ways, you speak of these in your book, really in a, I mean, it's a very positive book. It's a very, I mean, if there's a book that says that sports will lead us someplace better, I think your book offers some hope. And in the sort of pandemic, moving out of the pandemic, is there a sporting event that you're looking forward to, or do you have your eye on how this book plays out in the next 4 or 5 months? Or the Olympics is certainly going on.
Certainly the Tokyo Olympics. And I was really hoping, you know, that they would go off, and ultimately whether they have foreign spectators or not doesn't really matter that much, because the vast majority of people around the world are going to watch it on TV anyway. It's unfortunate. I love Japan. I would love to have gone, and it sucks if you had tickets and you planned and now you can't go. But for the most of us, and it's not that they're going to be empty stadiums, it's just going to be that they're going to be Japanese fans in the seats. So the thing about the Olympics is it draws in sports or fans who are maybe not sports fans. Like, people watch the Olympics who don't watch any other sporting events, and they get some of the same kind of benefits that I talk about in the book. And, you know, there's one of the sort of stereotypes of the sports, negative stereotypes of the sports fan is as a couch potato. And one of the things I looked at was instances where simply being a spectator, watching sport on TV can actually make you more active and encourage you. And there's few better examples than the Olympics, which drive a big spike in gym memberships. And it's interesting because, you know, like, I like NFL football, it's my favorite sport, but I never finish watching a game and say, man, I'm going to go get a helmet and go out in the street and have somebody knock me down, right? There's no interest in that. But people watch the Olympics and they want to try things, or they want to just get, it's called, you know, general fitness interest. They might not want to take up gymnastics, but they are inspired to better themselves, even if that's just like going to an aerobics class. So I think the Olympics are something I'm really glad to have back, because they provide all of the benefits I talk about, and an international camaraderie as well.
And few of the drawbacks of there were some superstitions, rules of conduct. You know, part of what might have driven me from baseball is the realization that I really shouldn't spend that much time watching baseball. And if I did, I wasn't really a good fan. So I decided rather to be a lapsed fan. You know, that's a lot of games.
Yeah, and baseball, you know, has really suffered from the games getting longer and slower, and they realize that, and they're trying to address that. But for me personally, the big fan weapon of the last, you know, 10 plus years has been the DVR. If I watch a baseball game, I never start it on time. I'll start it, you know, 50 to 60 minutes late, and then fast forward not only through the commercials, but between pitches.
So 15 minutes, can you watch a game 15 minutes late, but if it's like the next day, would you still watch the game? Or does it somehow loses some currency? Like I would never watch a football game after the day later. I just can't do it.
It's not even to me that it's a day later. It's once you find out the outcome, it's no longer interesting to watch. And I'm not on social media all the time where I can't wait 50 minutes and not know who's going to win that game. But like in football season, you know, here in New England, you know, it's a cold winter. and it's a short daylight period. So I'm not going to sit home and watch that 1 o'clock game when I could go cross country skiing or walk my dogs when it's like the warm light part of the day. But I know that when I walk my dogs in the woods, I'm not going to find out whether my Bills won or lost, and I can still go home and immediately start watching that game at 3 or 4 o'clock and enjoy it. But no, as I say in the book, I mean, that's what really separates sports and why advertisers love it, because it's one of the few things we kind of have to watch in real time. But nobody waits 17 weeks and then binge watches the NFL season the way you might with Breaking Bad.
No, exactly. I can think of going, and this I think speaks to your book. We used to go when I was in graduate school. I would go to a bar with my wife that was in the sort of shadows of a mayonnaise. It's where all the mayonnaise in America is made, essentially, right in this bar. And all different classes, all different kinds of people, all different sports teams. As the Giants, we weren't hated really. We're in, but it turned out at one of the key moments, we had no idea that our broadcast was 5 minutes delayed. So we're cheering after everyone in the bar has already seen the result, and it was for a Giants game. But anyhow, it speaks to this of odd connections that come together, real friendships around the ability to speak a common language of sports and competition and memories, great moments. Is there a great moment? What's that great moment, sports moment that you have? Is it American Ninja Warrior?
No, I mean, and for me, I grew up in New York City, which I would say now is probably the most uncollegiate sports centric major city in the United States, right? No real colleges of note that are, Columbia is not a football powerhouse, right? NYU doesn't have that culture. So I grew up paying very, very little attention to college sports. And then I went as an undergrad to Georgetown. And in my freshman year, we won the NCAA championship with Patrick Ewing.
Yeah, I remember.
And so in a period of just a few, less than a year, I was completely immersed into the highest level of what you can succeed at, short of maybe Alabama football, in winning, and now that it's on and, the Hoyas somehow managed to make it back to the field this year, even though they got bumped in the first round. But, I've come to appreciate, because I know a lot of my friends have kids now who go to schools like Michigan, and how rare it is to actually win an NCAA championship during your undergrad tenure. So that's probably, the moment that really stands out.
That's that moment. Yeah. So I know we're going to have to get to questions pretty soon. So I have to say that this is as a Chekhov scholar, I know at the beginning of the play, if you put a gun on the wall or somebody's touching the gun, there's a rule that you're supposed to fire that gun sometime in the play. It creates this sort of dramatic tension, and the dramatic tension that you built into this talk were your 3 Guinness awards or your records. And I think I think everyone in the audience would like to know how you did it. Is that
sure. Yeah, and when I was writing that book, I thought it would be fun to take a George Plimpton approach to it. He did all this participatory journalism where he played hockey for a goalie for an NHL team and kicked field goals. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write about the book of records and all the people who devote so much energy to it, I should go through the process. Plus, it's a way to find out and to be able to tell people what is it like. And I learned a lot on the way. But the first one that I did was and I broke an existing record, which was the greatest distance traveled between 2 rounds of golf played in the same day. And I had specifically wanted to break a golf record because at the time I wrote a lot about golf and I was doing a story on Guinness for Golf magazine. But most of them were like lowest score ever shot, 59, most major wins, Jack Nicklaus, biggest margin of victory, Tiger Woods. So I'm like, there's nothing here for me. And then I see this record. And logistically, I was able to break it. 7,496 miles. I played in Australia in the morning and Southern California in the afternoon, because the Guinness rules stipulate same calendar day, not same 24 hours. and then because there's a few different ways you can break an existing record individually. You can participate in a group record, which is like most people wearing Groucho Marx masks in one place. There's a lot of those, but you don't get a certificate for that because there's usually like 10,000 people. Or you can petition Guinness to create a new record, which is what I did for my second one because I wanted to experience both. And that was at the time when poker had just become really hot in this country. And I had written a big story for Inc. magazine on the business behind the World Poker Tour. And I was really immersed in the poker scene, and poker was hot, and they didn't have any poker records because it was a very new, not that poker's new, but poker as a, trend was new. Yep. So I went to them and said, hey, I'm going to set a record for the longest casino marathon poker playing session because they have a lot of time-based marathon records. And they said, sure. And I did it at Foxwoods, and it was 72 hours and 2 minutes. And I would never really recommend that.
Not with your own money at the end.
No, I actually won money, but it takes a toll physically, mentally. Your eyes literally hurt. I didn't remember parts of it. It was like a waking blackout. Really not pleasant. And
your third award?
Third one record was, so actually after my book came out, I got banned by Guinness because they thought the book was sort of like an unauthorized biography. They were really upset. And so they sent me a letter banning me permanently from record breaking. And then they actually read the book and realized it was really positive and they liked it. And it was, interesting and told their story well. So they kind of apologized and reinstated me. And I have no proof of this, but I believe I'm the only person ever to have been banned and reinstated from Guinness World Record setting. So I did a story for Outside Magazine about my triumphant return to record breaking. And the record was the most different ski trails skied in their entirety at a resort in 8 hours. And that's based on the fact that most ski resorts operate the lifts for 8 hours, they run from like 9 to 4 or 8 to 4, whatever. So, and I did that in Crested Butte, Colorado. And again, that was a long freaking day.
Sounds like it. So do we, I don't know if we have questions out there, but people have been waiting for a good while.
Yeah, this has been such a fun conversation. I have loved listening to this in the background. I'm curious if Guinness wanted to know your golf score or if they were just interested in the distance between the 2 points. Because I imagine after that long of a flight, it'd be tough to play a good game.
Yeah, so they have a surprisingly intense amount of paperwork required. They want a lot of proof. And like if you set a record, you have to have video, you have to have witness affidavits. Certain ones, like the poker one, I had to have medical supervision. Wow. Anytime it's a sport that has a regulatory body like golf, they require it to be done under the rules of the game in conjunction with some officiant. So in that case, at both courses, I played with the head pro, who was a PGA member, and they had to sign my card as they would in tournament that I had completed. It didn't matter how many strokes I took, but I had to finish the game as you would. And so, yeah, they had my scores for both rounds, which unfortunately were, every time I play golf, my scores are too high. So.
But you did it, which is the point. And that's what a fun story. I just love that. So this has been really enjoyable. My background is actually in counseling. And this is something that I've never, we talk about, group things and, things that kind of rally people together, but I've never really thought of sports in this context of it being, a thing for mental health. But it makes so much sense. There's community, there's emotion, there's highs, there's lows. I feel like it's also a very physical experience too. And there's a lot of research now about just how physical movement affects the brain and impacts the brain, not just physical fitness, but, movement, cheering, high fives, things like that. So this has been a really, really interesting conversation. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, and I haven't made it to the chapter in the book yet, but a little bit more about the chapter on trauma and how, just kind of more specifically, like what you looked at as far as fans go and watching sports to kind of figure out what those mental health benefits were.
Yeah, and I talked to psychologists who specifically I mean, you can find somebody researcher who studies every niche topic, and there are psychologists who don't, not just sports psychologists who study fans, but who specifically study the effects of man-made and natural disaster, traumatic events, and sports. But the big takeaway was, regardless of the kind of event, whether it's a terrorist attack or a hurricane or a virus, like right now, after something horrible happens, there's a sort of a lockdown mentality. People feel safe at home, and then at some point they want to be with other people. And there are no venues in our society bigger than stadium. Even a medium-sized sports stadium is far bigger than the biggest mega church, mosque, synagogue. And that's why when people went to Shea Stadium that day, 50 some odd thousand people there together with strangers, maybe for the first time since the World Trade Center, in a crowded place in Las Vegas. The idea, that shooting was on the Strip at a concert. So the idea that you would go back a few blocks away into a crowd is a big, it's a big step. And I expect when we are able to go back to Citi Field and sit with 50,000 people shoulder to shoulder and high five strangers again, that will be the moment that the light at the end of the coronavirus tunnel has arrived. That's normalcy. And this year, interestingly, this is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and this September. And Major League Baseball has scheduled a Mets-Yankees game at Citi Field on 9/11, and it's clearly a commemorative. So my guess is, starting sometime this summer, you are going to see endless footage of Mike Piazza hitting that home run.
Oh yeah, that is really.
I want to say, Stephanie, one thing I learned during researching this book, because people ask me which sports fans are the most passionate, what cities, but it's really not cities. It's college football fans, especially in the South. I did not know until I read the book Rammer, Jammer, Yellow Hammer, which is about Alabama football, that, at Georgetown where I went, you go into the bookshop and there's mugs and t-shirts, and they have the logo, and they also have the NCAA hologram. This is an authentic licensed t-shirt. But at Alabama, they have coffins with NCAA licensed logos. And that really struck me, that you would want to spend the rest of your eternity in a roll tide 6 feet under. So
I cannot explain that, but I believe that it exists. Yes. And that was actually one of my questions. I'm curious if you see a difference in fans of collegiate level sports versus professional sports, because I live in Rhode Island now. My husband and I are both from Alabama. So obviously, we grew up kind of steeped in SEC football. But now up here, we're kind of having to make the transition over to professional, specifically the Patriots. So we're kind of trying to get into that now. But I wonder if there's a difference at all there.
I think, there is, in the sense that the thing that drives most people to be fans of a particular team are where they were born, just like religion, and what their parents practiced. Now, in some cases, if you're born in a certain part of Alabama, you're going to be a University of Alabama fan. But if you actually went to the University of Alabama, then it's different, because you could be from anywhere. That's what's different about college, is most people don't choose to become a fan of a particular team when they're 18 years old. They're already fans, right?
Yeah.
The college is a different thing. So it's even a higher intensity, because it's wrapped up in all of your friends. Your best friends are from college, your best memories, you being an alumni, being a supporter of the school. But I would say, that research shows that the average sports fan follows between 5 and 6 different teams. And most people I know who follow college sports also follow professional sports. So it's not really one or the other. But I think, and the fact that, the interesting thing to me is tailgating is more, there's tailgating at professional sports, but it's really a college-based thing.
Yeah.
And that's another part of this sense of community, and that you go and that guy making those ribs is going to be right there. I don't know him, but I've seen him for 20 years, in the same spot, cooking the same thing. And one thing that I didn't really realize, that I discovered during this, that I think most sports fans in America don't realize, is that college sports, the way we have it, is completely unique to the United States.
Yes.
There's no equivalent in Europe. They cannot understand.
No.
There's just no such thing, and that's really unique because they have colleges, they have universities, they have there's like Oxford, Cambridge rowing, but that's still
yes,
like
that's what I was going to bring
they
up.
have like these one-on-one events. There's not like an NCAA Division I rowing. So that's the thing. When I talk to like soccer fans make fun of American football and sometimes American football fans, but the thing that confounds foreigners completely is our college sports infrastructure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so my husband and I actually lived in England for a little while, and we did attend the Henley Royal Regatta, which was fascinating. But you're right, that is, I mean, I am actually trying to think of other, kind of collegiate or university level sports over there. And besides rowing, I guess maybe cricket. And then I think there are some kind of intramural type sports too, but it is a different world. And it is hard to explain that difference. So that is really interesting. What other differences do you see from country to country? Are there, I mean, I think of football or soccer in the UK versus here is very different.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, sports fans are sports fans. Probably the biggest difference is the U.S. fans are a little bit more nationalistic in terms of wearing like the flag, waving the flag, the national anthem. All of that stuff is not part of sports elsewhere except international events like the World Cup, the Olympics. They get very jingoistic when it's the World Cup, but you wouldn't go to a random soccer game in the top tier in Italy and see people waving Italian flags or a flyover of jet planes.
Yeah, interesting.
Go
ahead, Gregory.
The part of your when you come to identify with the team, or I think you said you were a Bills fan as well. So this is how you chose. We both grew up. I grew up in New York, and I was born a Yankees fan. And I think I would never, it's always troubled me. Or I wasn't actually born during the golden era. We were losing then, but I don't think I could ever be. It's not the team I would choose, but then it's the team you're given, and you have to stay with it. You can't switch teams. I could never, if I moved to Texas, I think I'd have to be a Giants fan still. And this is switched. The Mets switched up with the Brooklyn Dodgers, or this was sort of I don't know. I think I sort of, it's funny, I guess maybe I came across with the book with this part of like the tribal walls breaking down with fantasy sports. And there was a part of me that was said, no, that the part of the joy is actually the relationship. It's not just a team, but each team, there's a culture, and there's like a way, like different teams have different sort of quarterbacks or different styles of play, whether it's a small ball or whether it's home runs, or whether it's sort of New York where they call them lunch pails, sort of. And we'll see what the Pats end up with, since so much of their culture is wrapped around these winning years. They're sort of in this era where they have to remake their culture, I guess. But there's sort of I get incredible joy out of it.
Yeah, and most people do. And I think you're right though about the teams have the Bills, who I follow there. It's a kind of a working man culture. The way I think the Steelers and the Browns have the same kind of roots, but not everyone is a fit. Josh Allen is a good fit for the Bills, but I don't think Cam Newton would be. There's different kinds of players for different kinds of markets. But what you said, there's a lot of ties in choosing your team, the tribalism thing. There's a lot of ties between sports and religion. And yeah, like leaving the Yankees for another team would be like converting. People do it, but it's pretty rare, and you have to have a pretty powerful reason. And what I have seen is when people relocate, they often do, because they want to go to games, they adopt their local team. But like I have a good friend from New Hampshire who's an avid Patriots fan, moved to Seattle after college, has lived there ever since. He goes to the Seahawks games, he loves the Seahawks, but if the Seahawks and the Patriots played in the Super Bowl, it would still be the Patriots for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to. For me, right now, I think it's the draft and free agent. Somehow, it's existing in a sports meta world where you're waiting for your team to play. But I will say that probably the March Madness might be the most exciting sports for non. If you don't even follow a sport, you can just tune into that, and the last 10 seconds are likely to be decisive in any one game.
Right. Everybody makes brackets, no matter if you watch or not. It's just
something,
the thing to
there's
do.
something special
Yeah.
that they, this sort of, for me, it's almost like you can feel a sport in your bones. There's a rhythm. When you were saying that baseball has lost something, it's because baseball is about tension and release and rhythm, and just like a haiku. And a haiku doesn't get better with extra syllables. You know, it has a way. And the same with football. There's a pace to it, and you're feeling the game because there's an inner math to it that you feel, that it's games of attrition or games of that all that have to play out over a set period of time. And it's same in theater. You feel the electricity. Theater before the lights. You know, you watch the actors on stage before they put up the lights, and it's dull. You have to know that the play, you have to see it and sense it. They turn the lights on, and the actors just like plants, they come alive, and the fans too, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I was just to say, years ago, I went to Las Vegas and did a story when they used to have the U.S. game of the Rugby Sevens World Cup. It used to be in Las Vegas every year. And Rugby Sevens is like the shortened version with less players that they had in the Olympics for a little while, where the games are only like 14 minutes long. And they say, you know, it's a smaller field and they play offense and defense. And it's like the most frenetic sport you can imagine. And I had never seen a rugby match of any kind, but I go out and watch this whole international tournament, and it's one game after another. They're 14 minutes long, right? Hey, South Africa versus New Zealand. Now it's Great Britain versus the US. And it's so easy to understand. I was immediately obsessed with it in a way that I couldn't be if it was a game that was hard to understand watching it. And that's why, things like the Olympics, if you watch freestyle skiing, you don't have to know anything about skiing to see that doing like, a 1080 rotation inverted flip is amazing. And this year at the Olympics, one of the new sports is surfing, right? Most people have never seen professional surfing on TV. And when they do, they're not going to have to know anything about surfing to sit there at the edge of their seat and be like, wow.
Yeah, that is one thing that I really appreciate about sports. I mean, we watch football every year and every season, but sports are things that when you are with other people and you can sit down and watch a game, you don't always necessarily have to know everything about the game to kind of get swept up in it. And it's a lot of fun. So I know I'm definitely looking forward to the Olympics later this year. Glad that they're finally happening. What is your kind of, now that COVID, the light at the end of the tunnel, what is kind of the sporting event that you are both looking forward to the most?
Of all the sporting kind of bucket listy sporting events that I've been to, my favorite, which was a surprise to me, was the Kentucky Derby.
Oh, so fun.
And, I've been to the Super Bowl. Being an NFL fan, that should be sort of the top, but there's a lot of things about the Super Bowl that make it less appealing than it should be. But the Kentucky Derby, I was swept up in, and I came out of there thinking, well, if I could afford to do it right, because there's a big difference how you do it, I would go every year. Which I can't really think of another sporting event I would really want to do that for. And I certainly want to, and I did have plans to go back. So that's one I would really like to go back to when, and again, it's so much about not being at reduced capacity, about having, everybody there. So that's one. Greg?
I was thinking about there's a little baseball stadium in Newport, Rhode Island that I've
Yeah.
been wanting I've been driving by for years that I've been wanting to go to. I don't know, it might be semi-pro, and or maybe a AAA game in Pawtucket. So over to Rhode Island, but it's really I'm looking forward to it's all about NFL. I'm waiting for I'm waiting for spring for the training camp and or the kickoff.
Yeah.
So it's
Larry, I have to recommend too, if you enjoyed Kentucky Derby, highly recommend Royal Ascot every year. That is one of the most amazing events I've ever attended. And I had never really watched horse racing before, but when you go and you do a little bit of research, bet on a horse, it's so much fun. And then of course, there's the people watching and everyone's all dressed up and not in their regular kind of jersey sports gear. It's a bit of a different crowd, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I have heard great things about it. I did get to go to the Melbourne Cup, which is the only sporting event I know of in the world that is an actual holiday. It's Melbourne Cup Day in Australia.
Oh, wow.
It's a weekday, I think. Like the Super Bowl is always on a Sunday, but if they decide to have it on Tuesday, it would probably be a holiday here.
Yeah.
It's like they call it the race that stops a nation, and it literally everybody is either there or they're at a party. So yeah, Royal Ascot's next on my list I'm not into horse racing, but I love that pomp and circumstance. And
well,
dress up.
Royal Ascot is for you then.
I think you in your book you speak about the sort of moral aspects of say like cycling and then of course doping and NFL and the violence of the players. And for me, I guess with the horse racing and even for all these sports, I'm always weighing how my enjoyment plays out in terms of just like the goodness of wishing well for the players not to be hurt, the horses not to be hurt, concussions, some of the great, maybe some of the great parts that I really enjoy about the NFL, I've come to think might have been immoral. But I miss them. And horse racing again, it's that I love the horses, but I'm a little frightened of the 2-year-olds and their soft bones.
Yeah, that is certainly something to think about. Yeah, for sure.
Just a little bit, not too much.
Well, Larry, I'm curious to know what's next for you. You've written about food. You've broken Guinness World Records. Now sports and fans. What are you working on next?
I don't know. I have tried to kind of not repeat topics. In this case, I have a lot of material that ended up not in the book that's really interesting, but it just wasn't. It's interesting for sports. It's not applicable maybe to the fan thesis, but stuff that I had a lot of trouble cutting. So, I haven't figured out if there's enough there or a synergy between what I have to bring together a story. But all of my book ideas have come while traveling, something I've seen, encountered, and I've been home for 13 months, so I'm kind of stymied mentally, creatively right now. But I am hoping, certainly by June to go back. I was, for the last 25 years, I was traveling 100+ days a year around the world. So big change for me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully soon we will get back to that and you can go to Royal Ascot then. Well, I think this is a great place to wrap up. This has been a really enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much, Larry and Gregory, for joining us tonight. And thank you so much to everybody watching. I will pop a link into the book one more time. And there it goes. All right. Yes. So I know that Savoy has a bunch of copies. I know Bank Square does too. So go ahead and place those orders and we will be sure to get those out to you as soon as possible.
It's a great read.
Yeah, it definitely is. I will be sure to finish it this week. Thank you both so much. And thank you so much for everybody watching. Hope you enjoy your night.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye. Bye, everybody.